Hello, good morning and good afternoon to our audience in Europe. My name is Milda Boyce, Director of Transatlantic Leadership at the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, D.C. I'd like to welcome everyone to our virtual discussion on the transatlantic response to the latest cyber threats and preparedness to address these challenges in the times of the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. So to frame our discussion, I'd like to present a few observations. We've all been witnessing and experiencing a disabling impact by this pandemic on the functioning of societies, the availability and access to essential goods, and overwhelming impact on the global economy in general. The COVID crisis has also ushered in the greatest digital experience of our time, as nearly every aspect of our lives, including many of our jobs, have moved online and increased our reliability on essential sectors such as cyber systems and IT networks. So the over-reliance on these digital tools, particularly those with major security flaws, have presented opportunities for state and non-state actors to exploit the situation and capitalize on the crisis in the attempt to disable and disrupt critical services and infrastructure, putting public health and safety. Our adversaries and strategic competitors, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, increasingly use cyber operations to intimidate and undermine our efforts in coping with this crisis. So it's just to name a few, back a few weeks ago, Prague airport thwarted a number of cyber attacks with hospitals also targeted. It was an attempt to steal sensitive information about new coronavirus outbreak. The Czech intelligence assessed this to be a work of serious and advanced adversary. Then back in March, Chinese hackers targeted over 75 organizations around the world in the manufacturing, media, healthcare, and nonprofit sectors as part of the broad-ranging cyber espionage campaign. Then on March 15, in the US, Health and Human Service Department suffered a cyber attack on its public-facing computer system. That was called a campaign of disruption and disinformation aimed at undermining the US government's response to the coronavirus pandemic and was allegedly attributed to a foreign actor. There have been many other cases of cyber attacks in countries like Canada, UK, France, Italy, Slovakia, Lithuania, Ukraine, amongst many others. But how the pandemic impacts security and resilience across the cyber sector also depends on the response of regional, national, regional, and transatlantic cyber defense efforts. The US government, as well as the EU, have publicly addressed many of these cases, but I'd like to go back to this later in the discussion. And before we start with the questions, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists. So today we have Laura Gallant, the founder and CEO of Gallant Strategies. Laura has led intelligence teams exposing Russian and other state-sponsored cyber operations at the Department of Defense, a global cybersecurity firm FireEye, and now with her own firm, Gallant Strategies. Her work includes the first major attribution report of the hacking group known as APT28, aka GRU, and aiding the Ukraine government's information protectorate ahead of the 2019 presidential election. The second speaker we have is Merle Maigre, the Executive Vice President for Government Relations at Cybexer Technologies, an Estonian firm that specializes in providing governments, international organizations, and companies with cyber training environment and sophisticated large-scale cybersecurity exercises. And last but not least, we have Edvinas Kerza, a Lithuanian Deputy Minister of National Defense for Cybersecurity and a Director of the National Cybersecurity Center in Vilnius, Lithuania. Edvinas is also the mastermind behind the Lithuanian-led PESCO project called Cyber Rapid Response Teams and Mutual Assistance in Cybersecurity. So welcome all. The way I want to structure this is to keep the conversation interactive and do a couple of rounds of questions for our panelists before we field questions from our virtual audience. And in the interest of time, since we only have 60 minutes, I'll kindly ask our panelists to keep your remarks brief. And for the audience, if you're tuning in on Zoom, please use the Q&A feature at the very bottom of your window to submit questions to our panelists. If you're following us on Twitter, please send your questions to CEPA with the hashtag #CommonCrisis, and we will try to loop in your questions to the discussion. So I'd like to Laura, given your expertise leading programs on state cybersecurity operations on both sides of the Atlantic, what is your take on the cyber sector and the importance of protecting the cyber operations during the pandemic? what should the US and Central Eastern governments pay a particular attention to today and in near future as the pandemic subsides, or to make matters worse, as we discussed briefly earlier, decides to come back in the fall?
Well, thanks, Milda. This is a great topic. There's obviously been a rightful focus on the public health dimensions of this crisis, of course, but just as any crisis creates opportunity, a lot of adversaries in the space and hackers in the space have taken this as an opportunity to exploit a variety of targets. The way that I see cyber operations around COVID-19 breaking up is like this. First, there is a use of this crisis to attract attention to lures for spear phishing and for other types of attacks that require a user to simply click on a link or go to a website that's already infected. And we've already seen that in numerous cases, people using the lures of, look at this coronavirus cure, or here's a new report from the WHO, the natural human curiosity to go in and look at a document and click on something. So be careful on what you click on. This is basic cybersecurity and hygiene that countries are aware of. So lures are this first aspect of the crisis. The second piece that I see when we think about cyber operations related to COVID is ransomware. Ransomware has obviously been around for some time, and this is when a message will come to usually an organization. The email will say all of your data is encrypted, it's taken away, you need to pay a certain amount, obviously a pretty high price, to get this data back. The most famous, I think, recent ransomware that we saw before COVID was around the British healthcare system, the national health system, back in 2017 with WannaCry, later attributed to the North Koreans. What we're seeing now with COVID is we've had the hospitals in the Czech Republic, we've had hospitals in the US and Boston and elsewhere held to ransom notes and ransomware attacks as well. So that's really something that we can dig into, but it's a place where there's a lot of vulnerability. Obviously, there's a lucrative opportunity from a cyber criminal standpoint, because money is what drives these people, right? And there was an interesting kind of treatise, if you will, that came out a few weeks ago where several cyber criminal gangs were asked, would you stop operations, ransomware operations against hospitals during COVID? Several of them said yes. The next day there were ransomware attacks. So, and then the third target that I would look at is new targets. What this crisis does is it opens up an opportunity for cyber criminals and adversaries to look at a different target spectrum. So now hospitals are very much at the center, but this also includes organizations trying to fight this problem. The World Health Organization has said that they've increased the number of attacks that they've thwarted, and the attempted compromises they've been experiencing is really high. Interpol has said as much too. So lures, ransomware, and then a spectrum of new targets. Those are the three categories I see in how we look at cyber operations around COVID.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Laura. We'll come back to some of your comments a little bit later, but I have a question for Edvinas. Based on your observations prior to the outbreak of the pandemic and tracking most recent developments in the cyberspace in Europe and beyond Europe's borders, what has changed in terms of cyber attacks directed towards specific countries during the pandemic and potential cyber threats you might foresee in the future? And perhaps what deficiencies has the current crisis revealed in our cybersecurity capabilities, particularly when it comes to protecting states' critical infrastructure?
Well, hello, Milda. Hello, everyone. To be very honest, something changed dramatically over past 2 years. Remember, when we sent out Russian spies from embassies, we wanted to disrupt the network they were using and classic methods, how they gather information and doing harmful things to countries. And actually, we did not notice that they did not send new guys to those embassies, and no one asked why. The answer, in my opinion, the answer is because they found new ways how to do their job, to do espionage on us, on our citizens, on our governments. And that's why we went into deep analysis of apps, devices, and other smart things that we are all using every day to figure out what's going on. And this pandemic situation just, once again confirmed that it might be the case that they move to cyber digital space to do espionage on us all. It means that people are lazy, right? We like pleasures, we like fun things. That's why we download Face app to our mobile phone and do photos and look at ourselves, how we will be looking after 20 or 30 years. That's why we don't like paper. That's why we scan business cards to our apps, and we use, for example, RB card scanner, which on App Store seems to be American company, but at the end of the day, it's Russian company. We like cheap and comfortable taxi or cab driving. That's why we download to our smartphones Yandex taxi application, very similar to the one that you are using in the United States, in Russia, in Europe now is popular Yandex taxi. Which again is programmed by Russians, and it tracks everything. It gets access to everything what is in your phone, including your secure storage, your social accounts, passwords, everything, internally everything, microphone, camera, SMS, everything. At the end of the day, you return back home, and we all have Wi-Fi at home, so we use Wi-Fi routers. So we investigated those. One of the most famous company, quite economical company, D-Link. And it's also unsecure by design and manufactured in Russia, not in Taiwan. Tracking what you browse, unsecure by design, uploading firmware updates from Russia, and so on and so on. So over those couple of years, we provided all our personal information to apps, to devices that at the end of the day send all information to Russia. And then you need to have artificial intelligence and work with big data to do new intelligence job, new spying methods, and so on. And now this COVID-19 situation is more serious because we took our equipment from our offices and moved out to our kitchens, bedrooms, whatever houses outside cities, meaning now we have all business information with us, not only personal that I was mentioning before, but business at the moment. So other countries that would like to use business espionage or get some secret business information, new technologies that you invent in your office, you might be a target. And if you're using such unsecure equipment or apps in your devices, you might be a victim and release all those business informations to someone who is interested in that. Thank you, Milda.
Thank you so much. We'll probably touch base on the activity of authoritarian states a little bit later, but I wanted to ask a question to Merle. So piggybacking a little bit off of Laura's comments and Edvina's comments, what would your assessment be of your country's cyber industry efforts in combating cyber threats and attacks during the pandemic, and what opportunities do you see for greater transatlantic cooperation on cyber resilience? Perhaps what lessons can the US policy and cyber community focus on cyber defense from the Baltic States experience?
Well, thank you, Milda, and hello from my side. Indeed, well, I think it's fair to reflect on both attempts to counter the cyber threats, but also counter the difficult situation where we are more generally when looking for various digital solutions to combat the economic crisis, as well as to manage pressure on the medical system, and all the while trying to ensure that a normal life can continue as soon as possible. So I'd share perhaps three thoughts from the Estonian digital experience of dealing with the crisis, with the hope that this can be implemented more widely in the transatlantic space. So first, Estonia hacked the crisis. That was back in mid-March. On the same day that the Estonian government announced the emergency situation, the Ministry of Economic Affairs launched a fully online hackathon called Hack the Crisis. And that hackathon produced projects that have already proven to be useful. For example, while many government phone hotlines are overloaded, so people don't get answers to their COVID-19 related questions, the hack came up with a state-backed AI chatbot that has been providing coronavirus information, answering questions such as what are the travel restrictions, or how can I test for the virus, and so on. And later that initiative grew more global into a hashtag Hack the Crisis movement, and the global hack was born. Secondly, as many teachers are struggling to deliver their classes online, Estonia shares its online education experience, and there, I believe that the Estonian education system really relies on both the professional development of training of teachers and tech experts of education in both digital tools as well as in cybersecurity related tools. So Estonia, together with some 7 Nordic countries, have opened up to share their digital education solutions for free, so that anybody else interested in that can dig into that pool. And thirdly, Estonia has helped to the world to boost the cyber hygiene or the cyber awareness at times of crisis, because indeed, as Laura said before, and as Yumilda mentioned, the COVID-19 has forced both offices and schools to close, and therefore the web really remains our only lifeline to allowing to work and educate our kids. And a number of people are growingly relying on online security, but at the same time, unfortunately, the cyber criminals are also making use of the crisis. We've seen phishing emails, we've seen ransomware, DDoS attacks, malware, and data stealing apps applied. So to help to battle this, Estonia has been offering free online cyber awareness training at mycyberhygiene.com, which is available in 13 different languages. This is an interactive site where everybody can learn and test their own personal cyber hygiene skills and prepare better for the threats. The objective of the whole course is to assess and decrease the risks coming from our own personal user behavior in cyberspace. So these are some of the attempts to battle the crisis.
Thank you so much, Merle. These are really useful, and thank you for your comments. I see some of the questions from the audience are popping up, but before we turn to the audience, I'd like to ask another interesting round of questions. This one is a little bit longer, and it's addressed to perhaps Edvinas and Laura, and I would like to see if Merle could also comment on that. So just a little bit of a background. The 2019 Worldwide Threats Assessment released by the US Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, claims that China presents a persistent cyber espionage threat and a growing attack threat to our core military and critical infrastructure systems. Authoritarian states, as I mentioned before, such as China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, are engaging in cyber attack techniques aimed at spreading chaos, fear, and undermining our Western democracies. And rewinding a little bit back to the cyber attacks in the Czech Republic, the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, in support of the Czech government, announced in the official statement that anybody engaged in such activity should expect consequences. So my question is, so what are these consequences, given that our adversaries and other malign actors all use cyber operations as a low-cost tool, like some of you alluded to, advance their interests? Unless they face clear repercussions for such actions, they will continue to do so. So help me understand why are governments often reluctant to attribute cyber attacks to other states, and why should it matter to the democratic governments? Perhaps I'll turn to Laura first. Based on your work in Ukraine, which has been a target of numerous cyber attacks attributed to Russia, what lessons has the US learned from the Ukrainian context? And has the USG been more aggressive perhaps in its attribution recently, or should it be?
Yeah, great question, and a lot of questions wrapped up there. Let's start a little bit with Ukraine's experience, because as usual, Ukraine is a bit of a leading indicator of what the Russian government and Russian military is willing to do in cyberspace to other countries. What we've seen over the years is Ukraine and operations in Ukraine sort of set this example. For instance, back in 2014, the Russian military group, the GRU, went in and tried to change the election results in that first election after the Maidan. So we've seen a precursor there. What we saw in mid-February, which I don't think got as much coverage as it should have, was a cyber operation done by a group called the Hades Group, which has loose ties to the GRU, to APT28. And what we saw is an email that was spoofed from the Ministry of Health in Ukraine. So it appeared like it was coming out of the Ukrainian Health Ministry. And it went out saying that evacuees from China were bringing the coronavirus back to Ukraine. And what it spurred were actual violent attempts at buses and barricading hospitals. And what that incident back in early February, as the world was really just starting to wake up to coronavirus, what that really showed us was, first, that adversaries like Russia are willing to exploit this crisis, and that there's a real moment of fear and panic here, obviously, that creates a window for people to take actions that they probably wouldn't. Most people would have looked at that email again and said, is this real or not, right? Versus going and shattering a bus's window. So there's really a very virulent concoction here of fear and adversaries willing to exploit it. We saw that in Ukraine. What I think we're going to see from happening in Ukraine, and the example that Russia has used there versus China, is the Russians are interested in adding a chaotic sort of feel to what is already happening, exploiting the political crisis around this. In the US, we're seeing a lot of activity around liberate or reopen, hashtag reopen efforts to open the US before we have the crisis under control. And we would see, and we'll continue to see, adversaries like Russia promote that in those political divisions. With China, and I'd be interested in the deputy minister's thoughts on this too. With China, the type of operations that we've been seeing are more about deflecting blame around the crisis and causing some confusion around the origins of where coronavirus came from. And this all still boils down to regime survival and how politically best Xi or Putin look at the end of the day with these operations. So as usual, cyber operations are supporting political means here, but there's two different political objectives between Russia and China right now in this crisis. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Edvinas, would you like to comment on that?
Well, yes, thanks. Well, actually, we did not mention today informational attacks, informational threat, which is usually what we notice, which is usually combined with cyber attacks, and it's more it more reflects to Russia because it's their method to get into systems, put lies, and spread disinformation, and they have, I believe. They did not change their methods for many years. Nothing changed, right? You perfectly mentioned doing chaos, putting some fear, and this was transformed to digital life. We monitor hundreds and thousands of fake news on social medias and dozens of cyber attacks to media portals. With the aim to put into the systems fake news, meaning putting lies, telling lies to our citizens, telling that EU, NATO are weak countries, they cannot manage to fight the pandemic, the COVID-19 situation. But of course, they write that Russia or other countries like those are fighting well, doing well. The virus is not spreading, meaning that their health system was well prepared. But look, in the United States, in Italy or France, they are absolutely unprepared, and many people died. But the truth is that by doing this thing, they hide the reality of real situation in Russia, where many people are infected, and no one knows the exact number, how many people died or are still in hospitals, because it's their way to tell lie. Although China is acting a little bit in a different way, they're using now diplomatic tools providing kind of health equipment or masks and other things, kind of showing that they are coming to help everyone, and this is kind of a new role of China. So two main countries, but acting very, very difficult.
Merle, thank you, Edwin. Merle, could you please comment as well?
Sure, yes. I wanted to add to this a bit like a reflection of a possible danger that we see, particularly coming from China, as related to the economic crisis as one result of the COVID-19. And this is an approach of the various foreign investors looking to pluck broken companies in the pandemic-induced economic environment, because surely we're looking ahead at economic depression. And in that light, looking at what happened back after the 2008 and 9 crisis, when Chinese firms ventured out to acquire various discounted assets around the globe, the question is whether China will repeat and do that again, with China's economy having a head start coming out of the present crisis and its appetite for technology and other strategic assets as strong as ever. The question is, will the history repeat itself? And some of the countries have already taken some mitigative measures against that. For example, Australia, the target of much Chinese investment in the recent years, has and is currently reviewing all foreign investment to protect national interests. And similarly, France, Italy, and Spain, for example, plan measures to defend strategic companies from various foreign takeovers. At the level of the European Commission, President Ursula von der Leyen has pledged that the EU, while it needs to remain open to foreign investments, must also balance its openness with the need to preserve its economic sovereignty. So the question is whether will China, with this crisis, have more opportunities to continue engaging in its so-called model of debt trap diplomacy, while trying to help European, and particularly perhaps some of the Central Eastern European countries to recover from economic hardships. And it will be interesting to see, will we be able to prevent China's dominance of 5G and telecommunications networks in the Central Eastern European environment? And one of the lessons learned from that, in that light, it would definitely make sense to review foreign investment in critical technologies, in infrastructure, and in sensitive personal data. Thanks.
Thank you so much to all. These are great answers and comments, and some of them will probably be related to some of the questions that are already popping up. But just before we turn to the audience, I also wanted to ask you all a question that's really relevant right now on EU level and as well for US, as some European countries are preparing to ease the lockdown requirements to prepare for safe exit. Just a few weeks ago, European Commission adopted a resolution, as some of you might know, a set of recommendations to the EU member states as coordinated EU approach to use digital means to address the crisis. And one of the means is to introduce mobile applications for more targeted social distancing measures, as well as help trace and limit spread of the coronavirus. Meanwhile, the Chinese government and now Moscow have been using the QR code to trace and monitor the movement of their citizens under the premises to also track and prevent the spread of the virus. So similar measures to EU, but different tools. Could you perhaps please explain your understanding and the key difference between the Chinese and Russian QR code mobile health apps and the mobile apps recommended by the EU as one of the safe exit strategies? What does it mean for the future of the citizens' data privacy, and how is it going to affect us and our own communities in the future? I'll see if any one of you could take this one first. Laura, thank you.
Sure. So the QR code, just in case anyone out there hasn't seen one by chance, it's sort of that scrambled barcode that can be used to transmit data. It's on your phone. And what we've seen the Chinese do first was use the QR code as a green, orange, red system for getting on public transportation, for going to different parts of the city, for entering an apartment block. And the way these different color codes work based on scanning the QR code is green meant you're free to move around, orange was you should be in quarantine, and then red is you're infected or you have a close contact who is. And what China didn't explain is how they're getting this algorithm to give you the green, orange, or red color, which is your pass essentially around the city. And it's been issued through WeChat, which some 900 million people use, and then through Alipay also. These are ubiquitous apps in China. Obviously, this is one huge example where we're trying to figure out collectively as a society, how do you weigh privacy and security here? And in a crisis like this, it's really easy to look at privacy concerns and they feel minimal in comparison to the health risk and the security risk that we're all facing. On the other hand, when you look at the record of China, when you look at the record of Russia, the two countries who were quickest to use a QR code to regulate people's movement, these are countries with a track record of using data on their citizens for a variety of intelligence collection purposes and political oppression. So I think it's a good lesson to see how countries can start to grapple with this really tough concern. What we've seen in Europe and what we've seen in South Korea is an approach around contact tracing. So it's not simply let me restrict your movement based on a government's back algorithm that we don't have data to, but how do I trace efficiently the contacts that I've had if I'm infected or someone I know is infected to know the proximity of the virus to you. And I think that's a substantially different use of data than the QR code for free movement. So I'm interested to see how that gets implemented. And I think that the safeguards around people's data as this crisis passes and even during it are going to be really important, and privacy advocates should have an important voice in how this is crafted. It's really hard in a crisis like this to hear those voices as loudly as they should be, given the track record that a lot of governments who will use this have on the issue.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Laura. That's helpful to know. Perhaps Mike Merle, please go ahead.
Sure. Yes. Well, if to add anything to it, I'd say that indeed what's currently going on in Europe is to come up with a mobile application for contact tracing, with the goal of these applications to help healthcare systems to notify people who might have been infected, and enabling to take swift steps to avoid infecting others. And of course, while useful, this contact tracing solution must not become a tool to spy one's population, which is why privacy considerations are at the central stage of this design. We in Estonia, along with other countries, are currently, there is a public-private partnership in an attempt to come up with an app. And a key element of Estonia's approach to this contact tracing tool is the principle of decentralization, which is the same principle that underpins several other Estonian e-states solutions. And it is important to underline that when the app will be available for people, it will only be on a voluntary basis, so nothing is forced upon people.
Edwin, please.
Yes, well, Merle very perfectly reflected that voluntary basis is a mandatory thing in Lithuania also, the same principle. But I would like to just urge that understanding what is privacy in EU and in Russia, it's something like white and black, you know. In Russia, they understand that you can take everything which is personal and use it for governmental purposes, and even don't tell you what they do and how they act with your personal data or information. In our countries, in modern world, we respect privacy and we have very strict rules how it's going to be used, how it will be stored, how it will be afterwards released, and goals and purposes are known to everyone, to all users, to everyone that is in this process. And of course, there is a control mechanism on this, how it's being processed, so you can be sure that your personal data did not go out somewhere out of EU, was not used for intelligence purposes, and really it was meant to help you, to support you, to manage the crisis, but not to spy on you, to do political pressure, or I don't know, do social, impact on your thinking, on your political views, and so on. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All your comments just kind of reminds us that we all need to be really vigilant and proceed with our strategies. But right now I see quite a few questions in the audience, and I see that there's a few that I could group them together. But first, I'd like to present is from my colleague, Ben Hodges. This question is to Edvinas. Which ministry is responsible for cyber protection of transportation infrastructure, airports and seaports in each Baltic nation? Perhaps that would be a question to also Merle as well. And also to add, does spending on that count towards its 2% defense spending obligation with NATO? And should it, since this trans network is also essential for deterrence and defense?
Yes, well, we in Baltic States act a little bit differently. In Lithuania, a couple of years ago, we centralized all cybersecurity. And today in Lithuania, there is only Minister of Defense and me, Vice Minister of Cybersecurity, who is responsible for whole country. It doesn't matter whether you are a person, a business company, a governmental company, or a military network, I don't care. Everything, including policy, protection, defense and offense, everything is under one ministry, under one umbrella. It's under Ministry of Defense. Yes, we use same 2% of our budget. Yes, we protect the whole country, including critical infrastructure. And we assume that cybersecurity, cyberspace, is the same fighting place as any other, just happening in peacetime, which is very important. And in peacetime, we civilians and military ones work together 24 hours per day, 365 per year, to protect all Lithuania cyberspace, not dividing into any pieces. In Latvia and Estonia, it's a little bit differently. As in other countries, they have segmented their space elements, and critical infrastructure is usually responsible Minister of Defense. For civilian part, usually they do have certs that are in some cases under Minister of Transportation, on other cases somewhere else, and so on and so on. But Merle would probably better present their case.
Merle, on to you.
Thanks. Yes, it is different in different countries, and in Estonia, the responsibility to guarantee that all essential service providers, first to identify what are the essential service providers, what exactly is crucial for the nation and for the society to function safely, and where are the bottlenecks in cybersecurity, which power plants, which logistic points, which ports, clean water, and all of that, to define at national level the essential service providers, and then to guarantee that their cybersecurity is up to the level, and to regularly check and to train. That responsibility in Estonia falls under the State Information Authority Agency, which is sitting under the Ministry of Economy. So they cover from their end all these, and this is the location of the national CERT as well, and the national CERT is the primary responsible sort of responder if any of these places would be attacked, or to protect them, and also to check that they live up to the standards. It's important here, I think, also to mention that while different nations may have different Baltic nations and more widely different European nations have different places that are responsible for the cybersecurity of these essential service providers. Nevertheless, since 2018, all EU countries have them in place, and that is a requirement set out by the Network Information Security Directive of the EU, which is crucial, I think, to guarantee that the whole of EU is only as strong as its weakest link, so that all EU countries have in place and have thought through how their critical information infrastructure is protected. Now, on the 2%, I think it is easier to provide that these logistic points are covered from the national defense budgets when it all falls under the Ministry of Defense. In Estonia, the Ministry of Defense and the defense budget is covering the Estonian Cyber Command and their activity, while the rest of the society and the various airports and their cybersecurity does not fall under the defense budget. And this is a discussion, this is a crucial question, very good question by General Hodges, and definitely this is something that is regularly being discussed at NATO level under the title of Cyber Defense Pledge, which is a pledge all NATO allies made back in their summit, at the summit in Warsaw in 2016, pledging to commit necessary resources to cybersecurity and defense. We were supposed to have an update conference, a Cyber Defense Pledge conference in Tallinn in mid-April, but that got cancelled, postponed because of the virus. And this is definitely a discussion that NATO is leading very successfully.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Those are great answers. I have a few more that I could group. I have a question from Alex Tersky, U.S. Helsinki Commission, and it's on the attribution. So perhaps this could be to Laura, and another question that is also on the attribution that would like to hear more comments on. So could you please elaborate on what is publicly known about attribution regarding the attack on the Czech Republic? Speculation has obviously centered on Russian entities. Are we just being polite but not explicitly naming names? Also, what are the implications of these attacks for the long-term effort to establish norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace through the UN and the OSCE?
Great. Yeah, let's go back to the attribution question. I don't think we answered it in full when you posted earlier, Milda. So with the Czech Hospital, this was now, time is all relative at this point, but back last month. What we haven't seen is a real definitive forensic report or a lot of information, frankly, come out of that hospital or investigation. And I think it's a function of, you can't get anyone on the ground to look at data. It's really hard to, from a hospital standpoint, to stop and investigate this fully right now, given what's going on. And for all those good reasons, we don't have a lot of information that has allowed security researchers, governments, or anyone else to really dig in. I would hope that there's more going on behind the scenes in classified environments to share that information. But from what I've seen, there isn't good public details that would allow us to conclusively attribute the attack. There have been other aggressive Russian intelligence activities aimed at the Czech Republic recently. So I think that there was a jump, I would say, and perhaps premature, to see this in the lens of a offensive Russian activity. So I'd like to see more, in short, and I think that's the way most people feel about attribution around the Czech Hospital incident. And that sort of speaks to the broader attribution problem that we have in this crisis. Not only does attribution under normal circumstances usually take some time, because you want to collect data. You want to collect the data as native as possible to the actual attack. You want to have several different experts looking at it. You want to compare it to other attacks. You want to really dig into the actual tactics and procedures that were used in that incident. So this takes time. To give you an example, the NotPetya attack, which was the most expensive and most damaging attack of all time back in in 2017 that has been attributed to Russia, to the Russian government. That occurred in the summer of 2017, in June 2017, took multiple multinationals down. They had the data. The Ukrainian government attributed it in October. So what's that, 4 or 5 months later. The US government and the British government didn't attribute it till February 2018. So, and that was relatively quick. So these international incidents and attribution around them, it takes time. We're dealing with skeleton teams in different intelligence communities around the world right now too, given people's stay-at-home order. And that's a reality that adversaries know, and it's a reality that researchers know. If you can't get onto classified systems at work, it's really hard to share data. So I hope that there's a robust sharing discussion going on, and the Deputy Minister probably can speak to some of that, but I hope that there's a real discussion going on about how you share attack and attribution data when something like this happens and the normal means are really closed off to you.
That's actually a great comment and good question. I don't know if Edvina Somerle could comment on that. Thank you.
I can, Laura, actually, and Milda at the beginning mentioned about cyber rapid response team project and mutual assistance. This idea came to my head more than 2 years ago, that in this complex world, you know, being alone in cyberspace, you can do nothing. Although those criminals use friendly countries' infrastructures to attack us and so on. And as you perfectly mentioned, investigations take time, and this is crucial if you can collect evidence, logs, and so on and so on. That's why I suggested and came up with an idea in EU to create such team that would be, on one hand, well-educated, well-trained. On another hand, we would have all legal parts in place. So we already have legal documents. We share people that physically sit in different countries, and we create smart tools to them so they could quickly go on site and do their job, of course, collect evidence, but on the other hand, stop the attacker, and then come back home and provide those all collected evidence to EU, and no one will say that it's one country's evidence-based, you know, report, because the team consists of at least 4 or 5 experts that come from different EU countries. We use a common budget, which means that we do not create our tools every country separately, but we do it together. It means it costs us less, so meaning information and tools can spread easily in EU to many teams, those rapid response teams. And I believe that this model could work not only in EU but in other parts of the world also. And I'm personally very much waiting for PESCO to come up with the idea that third partners and countries could join those projects. That's why then we could invite United States, UK, or Ukraine to join those teams, so we could make our operations even more broad, and cooperation and time that we spend in those operations would be much less. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have really little time left, but I would like to really kind of combine my question that I had as an additional extra question, but also a question from the audience, is about whole of society approach. And this question comes from our CEPA colleague, Dalia Bankauskaitė. So she's asking, coping with COVID-19 pandemic, what are the lessons learned in building up the cybersecurity? And what is the role of the state and what it should play in ensuring the cyber digital security, and what should be the role of responsibility of the society, population, and individuals? Could you comment on that, perhaps, please? Thank you.
Happy to take that on my side. Yes, indeed. I think that's relevant, and this topic of the public-private partnership in cybersecurity is relevant beyond this crisis, beyond the COVID-19, and how indeed, how can the public and private sectors work together better in advance to prepare for the cybersecurity? I think the first step is to identify obstacles to effective cooperation and to determine ways to either remove them or resolve them. And then 3 points stand out here. I think the first is to help to build on a shared sense of trust, because the two communities, the public and the private, normally operate in different environments, because as public institutions, the public institutions are upholding the constitution and serving the public good, and private institutions are developing goods and services for the market, employing personnel and meeting shareholder expectations. So given the different aims and interests of the two sectors, bonds of trust can only develop through regular information sharing and cooperation cultivated over time. And I think this current crisis can definitely be a beginning of something, of a more information sharing, if that hasn't happened before. Secondly, I think it's important to have a shared perception of the threat, because if the parties do not see the world in the same way, they will not be able to act in a unified and coordinated manner. So do the relevant constituencies share a perception of the threat in a way that can drive them towards more cooperation and more better analytical decision-making? And if not, how can threat perceptions be changed? And thirdly, a common understanding of the potential market impacts of cyber defense action or inaction is necessary and useful, because before working with the government on any combined operation, this is something for the private sectors. The companies will want to conduct a thorough cost-benefit analysis to imagine potential impacts of their for them. And here, I think it's crucial to include in that cost-benefit analysis the potential loss of inactivity for the private sector. So baseline is to work on a community approach and to build bonds and to build trust. And this is something that has to be done gradually and through information sharing throughout time. And as said, crisis can be a good situation where we feel that we're all in this together, but we should definitely not stop with the crisis getting over. And this is something that should go on.
Thank you so much, Merle. So you alluded to something that I was kind of stirring towards too, and what Edwina said, that in cyber defense, you just can't be alone. And you, Merle, talked about national, efforts. Community is a requirement for addressing these crises and threats. So that takes me to my last question, if I could just wrap it up. So we talked about national efforts, regional efforts, but how can the US and European governments and cybersecurity experts and community cooperate more efficiently and better handle these threats in the future on the transatlantic level? Is it possible, and what are the biggest challenges, and how can we overcome them? I don't know if Laura could comment on that. I'm just really interested in hearing this.
So I think that Merle laid out a really good, the elements that are really important for how governments work on this problem and how societies work on this problem. One piece that I think occasionally gets overlooked is how important the sort of open security community is on thwarting cyber attacks and cyber operations and on attribution. And I'll give you an example, again, back to 2017. And this time it was with the ransomware against the NHS, against the healthcare system in Britain. And it was a private researcher who saw the information that there was a huge ransomware attack going on and went and registered one of the domains that the attackers were using and was able to thwart the entire global attack, right? So there are a lot of instances where defining a common problem and information getting out about what that problem is has led to sort of a swarming of activity by researchers and by analysts whether they're in a private sector company, whether they're in a government, whether they're just doing this on their own time at lunch break, of which there's a lot of people who do that in this field, who are able to go and put their collective resources and minds and research time into tough problems and solve them really quickly. So what I've always felt is that we need a better mechanism and connection, and we've been talking about rapid response rightfully a lot here, but how we integrate that amorphous security community that's really global and really helpful on these problems with government efforts and with other efforts around this crisis to define common problems and then rapidly respond to them is something that I think we've really got to keep our eye on. And I think there's one of the silver linings of this entire COVID experience is that people are seeing collective action and solidarity at a problem in a new way. And I think that translates to how people are trying to solve problems online too. Everyone's home who has good internet access, right? And looking online. And I think you've got an opportunity to better connect and knit together that security researcher community with the government response efforts that are going on.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have several more minutes and I still have a couple more questions, but they're really specific. I don't know if I can squeeze a few in. I will do my best. So one question on honeypots for Edvinas. Has your team seen any malicious honeypot websites that use COVID-19 information to attract and infect Lithuanian citizens and with malware? If so, do you think they are state-sponsored?
Well, I can tell you that we closed quite a lot of websites that were fake ones, and COVID-19 were the topic that they were using. It's very difficult to figure out because the incident is a small one actually in comparison of big incidents, and collection of evidence takes a lot of time, and then everything goes to darknet. So we did not investigate. We just monitor the cyberspace and social media space, and we quickly react and ban and close those websites and fake accounts on social medias. So not looking very deep from where it comes.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much. We have only a few minutes left, and there's so many questions that we haven't answered. Perhaps there's an opportunity for those questions to be addressed directly to the speakers. But I don't know if you had any last remarks before we close. I'd like to ask you, but really brief 1 or 2 minute remarks. Anyone would like to say anything?
Well, Wilda, I would like to thank you first of all for this perfect conference, and would like to say that me personally, I'm very happy about cooperation between United States and Baltic States. We're doing a great job, and in my country we are partnering very strong. And for example, last year we had 3 elections in Lithuania, and we were partnering physically with the United States Pennsylvania National Guard on protecting our systems that were used for elections. More in Kaunas, which is the second largest city, we have a practical center to cooperate between United States, Georgia, Ukraine, and Lithuania, solving those incidents and so on. So I want to say that if you have trust, if you have tools, if you have qualified people, everything is possible in this cyber age. And be sure we will fight those COVID-19 and other threats, and we will be winners. That's for sure. Thank you once again.
On my side, I think, well, first, it's really important to be able to discuss this with people coming from both sides of the Atlantic, and CEPA setting up webinar like this is a good example of ways to build trust and to bring people together. Ultimately, researchers, intel analysts, security and defense circles, this is what needs to be done in order to be able to more comfortably share information with each other on transatlantically. I think more generally, what we can learn, hopefully, from this crisis is that I think as we're all sort of squeezed online, yet it can sort of create, really force our innovative thinking, and innovations bring up opportunities to redefine citizens' expectations on the nature and quality of many public services, and altogether this enables a wider participation in democratic process. So I remain optimistic with this crisis.
I'll give you one final word here. I think they've summed this up very well, and CEPA's efforts here has been great. Make sure you always are updating, installing new updates, whatever software you're running, whatever operating system you're on. Make sure you have multi-factor authentication on everything. So don't let your security practices get lax if you're out there watching. This is a tough time for your IT administrator and your system administrator. So make sure you're doing your job to install your updates on time.
Excellent. Thank you so much. A round of applause to our distinguished panelists, and thank you so much to our virtual audience. Apologies for not getting to all the questions, but hopefully we'll be able to answer them in near future. See you next time, and tune in next week. A quick shout out, Tuesday, May 5th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, hosted by my colleague Ben Hodges. We'll speak about why military mobility matters during coronavirus. So thank you so much, and see you soon.